Welcome back to Palestine Bookshelf. I'm Stephen Heiner, and today we're going to be discussing Ghassan Kanafani's Men in the Sun and Other Palestinian Stories. I've actually done a short, about 15-minute review for this on my main Stephen Heiner channel. I'll put a link in the description as well as a card. Today I'm not going to repeat that review, obviously I'm happy with it, but what I'll do instead is read two short stories that I didn't talk about in my previous review, just to give you a sense of what Kanafani's writing sounds like. So I'm going to start with a story called Sad, and this is an excerpt from a novel called Sad. Sad lived for countless years with my family in Al-Gabasiyah, and since then she has lived for a crushing load of years in the torment of the camps. She still comes to our house every Tuesday. She looks at things, conscious of her part in them to the marrow of her bones, and she looks on me as a son, pouring into my ear the tales of her misery, her joy, and her troubles. But never once does she complain. She is a woman of about 40, I think, with a strength greater than rock and a patience more than endurance itself. She spends every day of her week coming and going, living her life 10 times over in toil to snatch for herself and her children an honest bit to eat. I have known her for years. She represents something in my life that I cannot do without. When she knocks on the door and puts her poor belongings down in the hall, I am enveloped in the smell of the camps, in their misery and deep-rooted steadfastness, their poverty and hopes. Again my mouth is filled with the bitterness that I have tasted year after year until it has sickened me. Last Tuesday she came as usual, put down her poor bundle and turned to face me. Cousin, I want to tell you something. Saad has gone. Where? To them. Who? The Fedayeen. A curious silence fell between us, and suddenly I saw her sitting there, aging, strong, her life worn away by wretched toil. Her hands were folded in her lap, and I could see the palms, dry as blocks of wood, cracked like an old tree trunk. Through the furrows that years of hard work had traced in them, I could see her sorry journey with Saad, from the time when he was a child until he grew to maturity. Those firm hands had nourished him as the earth nourishes the stem of a tender plant, and now they had opened suddenly, and the bird that had nestled there for 20 years had flown away. He's joined the Fedayeen. I was still gazing at her hands, folded palms upwards, like two disappointed creatures, crying out from the heart, chasing the man who is leaving everything for danger and the unknown. Why, O God, must mothers lose their sons? For the first time I was seeing that heartbreaking situation, at a word's distance from me, as though we were in a Greek theater living out a scene of inconsolable grief. Trying to distract her and myself, I asked her, "What did he tell you?" He didn't say anything. He simply went. In the morning his friend told me he had gone to join them. Didn't he tell you before that he would go? Oh yes, and I believed him. I know Saad, and I knew that he would go. Then why were you surprised? Me? I wasn't surprised. I'm just telling you about it. I said to myself, you may be interested to know what's become of Saad. The hands folded in her lap moved, and I could see them. Beautiful, strong, always capable of making something. I doubted whether they were really lamenting. She added, "No, I said to my neighbor this morning, I wish I had 10 like him. I'm tired, cousin. I've worn my life threadbare in that camp. Every morning I say, O Lord. 20 years have passed now, and if Saad doesn't go, who will?" She stood up, and an air of simplicity came over the room. Everything seemed more familiar, and I could see the houses of Al-Gabasiyah in it again. But I followed her to the kitchen. There she laughed as she looked at me, saying, "I told the woman sitting beside me on the bus that my son had become a combatant. I told her that I loved him and missed him, but he was a true son of his mother. Do you think they'll give him a machine gun?" They always give their men machine guns. And what about food? They have enough to eat, and they're given cigarettes. Saad doesn't smoke, but I'm sure that he will learn to there. Light of his mother's eyes. I wish he were nearby so I could take him food every day that I cooked myself. He'll eat the same as his companions. God bless them all. She fell silent for a moment, then turned to face me. Do you think he'd be pleased if I went to see him? I can save the money for the journey and get there in 2 days. She remembered something and finished off. Do you know something? Children are slavery. If I didn't have these 2 children, I'd have followed him. I'd have lived there with him. In a tent, yes, a tent in a refugee camp is quite different from one in a guerrilla base. I would have lived with them, cooked for them, done all I could for them. But children are slavery. I replied, There's no need to visit him there. Let him manage alone. A man who joins the Fedayeen doesn't need his mother to look after him anymore. She wiped her hands on her apron. Deep in her eyes, I glimpsed something like disappointment. That terrifying moment when a mother feels that she can be dispensed with and thrown into a corner, like an object worn out with use. She came closer, asking, Do you really think so? Do you think there's no point in my going to the commander there and asking him to keep an eye on him? She hesitated, feeling torn in two. Then she asked, Or could you ask his commander to keep an eye on him? Say to him, Look after Saad. May God give your children long life? How? I replied. You can't ask someone to look after a guerrilla. Why? Because you'd be asking his commander to arrange things so that he stayed out of danger. But Saad himself and his companions believed the best way to look after them would be to send them to war immediately. Again she sat there, but she seemed stronger than I had ever seen her. I watched a mother's perplexity and torment in her eyes and hard hands. At least she made up her mind. I tell you what, when you tell his commander to look after him, advise him not to annoy him. Say to him, Saad begs you, for your mother's sake, to let Saad do what he wants. He's a good lad, and when he wants something and it doesn't happen, he gets very miserable. Tell him, I beg you, to let Saad do what he wants. If he wants to go to war, then why doesn't his commander send him? And that's just an excerpt. That isn't even the whole story, but what a wonderful story. And as I've said before on the channel, and if you're new to the channel, hit like, subscribe if you'd like to hear more stories about Palestinians, not just about what has been happening to them, but about who they are and what their culture is. Every time I read more of Kanafani's work, I am so impressed at what he was able to get just from an UNRWA education. He didn't have the chance to go study at other universities. This was what he was able to get with just, let's say, a bare minimum education. What else could he have produced for us if the occupation hadn't persisted? So this is a short story called The Falcon. Our world was arranged with extreme care, each one according to his rank. And that is exactly what made our relationship with the guards of the building, that we, the engineers of the new construction company, occupied a relationship of greeting, and no more. Good evening, Jadon. The answer would come curtly from the wooden bench. Good evening, Abdallah. This Abdallah was each of us. Each one of us he called Abdallah. Jadon did not bother to learn our names. Each of us was Abdallah to him. And may God release the believers from the bother of remembering foreigners' names. The guard's room was at the end of the passage leading to the new building that was given up to us. It was indeed a splendid building, in contrast to the one we had lived in previously, which was filthy and intolerably crowded with mice and neighbors. Here in this new building, we lived entirely apart from everything, and with the passage of days, we almost felt we were isolated, not only from the quarter in which we lived, but from the whole city. If the guards had not said goodbye to us and greeted us whenever we came in and out of the building, we would certainly have felt that we were in an elegant cage that we had assigned to ourselves. These guards were Bedouin who had come in from the desert. Jadon was the night watchman, but nevertheless he would spend part of the hours of daylight prowling around the place, because there was nothing else for him to do. The day watchman was called Mubarak, a stout man of about 40, of a dark brown complexion and with a bent back, who walked as though he had just got up from sitting a long time. He wore the official uniform allotted to guards, a dark blue one with big brass buttons, and he slept inside the neat guard's room and covered himself with white sheets that were changed every week. We felt, despite our distance from the world of Mubarak and Jadon, that there was a concealed enmity or dislike between the two men. And we soon noticed that Jadon never wore the official uniform, but always a coarse abaya over a dirty robe that at some time in the past had been white. We noticed too that Jadon refused to sleep inside the neat room, unlike Mubarak, and that he had made himself an extraordinary bed out of 3 wooden planks that he had pulled from a big box and set up on 6 legs, covering it with a piece of black goat skin. At the end of the night we would see him fold up his rough abaya, put it under his head as a pillow, and doze off without a covering. We never saw him inside the neat room or in the navy uniforms with big brass buttons. It was most likely that Jadon despised his companion Mubarak in some way, or so we thought, and that Mubarak, in turn, inside that marvelous uniform, felt ashamed in front of Jadon when he looked him up and down with his small, sharp eyes. This belief was confirmed when Mubarak stopped me one day and asked me to write a complaint for him to the head of the company. A complaint against whom, Mubarak? I asked the question in the correct tone for an engineer addressing a guard 6 ranks below him. And he answered me, "Against Jadon. He refuses to clean the toilets when his turn comes." "Why?" "I don't know. He used to get your servant to do it and give him 3 rupees." "What does it matter to you so long as the toilets are cleaned at the right time?" He leaned against the wall. He was angry, and he explained excitedly. "Listen, sir, for a week your servant has refused to do it. Do you know what he did? Well, he asked me to clean the toilets for 5 rupees. And why doesn't Jadon do the job himself? Isn't it part of his duties?" He shook his head and brushed the dust from his arms. Yes, but do you know why he doesn't agree to do it? Well, he hasn't come here to work." "Then what has he come here to do?" He shook his head again, rather confusedly, and continued in a low voice. "Well, I don't know, but I believe that he has fled from his people." Mubarak sat on Jadon's bench and, looking at me with eyes full of malice, said, "It happened a long time ago. He wanted to marry a girl with red hair, whom he saw once near his tribe's encampment with men who had come to hunt the gazelle." Amazed, I said, "Jadon was in love?" "Yes, their sheikh ordered him to accompany the men and women hunting the gazelle. Do you know what? Well, he fell in love with her, and when she left, he went out of his mind." Mubarak took a small twig and began to scratch up the earth aimlessly. Then he said, "You know, they say many things there. Well, they say she loved him too." "She loved him? Why didn't they marry?" "What woman with red hair would agree to marry a Bedouin? He was a good man, but he was hopeless. You know what? He divorced his wife." I got up, but before I walked away I asked, "Why does he work here then?" He said he doesn't work here. He said that he merely sits here as a man may do anywhere in the world. Well, he said he had been through a great deal, and here a man can eat sitting down. Well, he said too that he wants to die here peacefully, and doesn't wish to return to his people. He's mad, I say. Will you write the complaint?" I walked to the door without answering him. Then I went up the stairs to my room. It was not easy to have a conversation tete-a-tete with Jadon. Despite this, I tried several times without despairing. Every time I stood impotent before his harsh, sunken eyes as he drew the barrier of silence over them. When I was at last able to sit beside him on his low wooden bench, I had not in fact intended it. I had arrived late and forgotten my keys at a friend's house, so I sat waiting. "I should have gone to sleep early tonight. Tomorrow we are going hunting." "Hunting?" Jadon asked the question coldly, absorbed in rolling his tobacco in the thin paper. "Yes, hunting gazelles." "How do you hunt gazelles?" "In a car, as usual." He shook his head and went on rolling the tobacco. As though talking to himself, he said, "You overtake the poor gazelle with the car, cut it off from its herd, you hunt it for hours until it is exhausted and stops. You get out of the car and catch hold of it as though it were a chicken." He lit a cigarette and drew a deep breath from it. He looked straight into my eyes and firmly said, "It's a disgrace." I suddenly felt as though Jadon intended to insult me. I spoke impetuously. "A disgrace? How do people hunt gazelles? With a gun? No, that's a disgrace." "Well then—" He took another breath, and through a cloud of his thick smoke his harsh gaze swept over me. He said quietly, "You must never hunt gazelles, Abdullah, either in a car or with a gun." "Why?" He looked at me suddenly, as though my question had wounded him. He shook the cigarette between his fingers in my face, and his eyes flashed. "Have you ever tried sitting in the desert, and the gazelle comes to you of its own accord? It rubs its head on your arm and stretches out its muzzle to your neck. It walks round you, looking at you with its wide eyes, and then it goes away. Have you tried that?" "No, have you?" As though he hadn't listened to my question, he murmured mockingly, "And you talk of hunting." I could bear his pride no longer and burst out, "Weren't you a hunter?" "Yes, a long time ago, Abdullah, a long time ago." I went a step further. "How did you hunt gazelles?" He shook his head sadly and repeated, "Yes, you catch it as though it were a chicken." "Listen, Abdullah." He turned to face me. Raising his legs, he sat cross-legged on the bench, putting his rough hand on my knee. Across that darkness, the voice came from far away. Listen, Abdullah, 20 years ago I hunted gazelles. I had a wonderful falcon named Nar. He was the best falcon the tribe had heard of for many years. When he flew, his wings blotted out the light of the sun, and he would fold them and drop like a stone. People would say, Jadon's Nar has burnt the gazelles. Silence reigned, and I imagined that he had stopped speaking. Despite the darkness, I was sure that his face at this moment was clothed in the unknown happiness that a man's face wears when he speaks of things that he has loved and lost a long time ago. But the voice returned, weak and scarcely audible. 20 years ago, I lifted the leather hood from Nar's eyes and he flew off, circling around. There was only one gazelle within reach, and I could make out its color from afar. It was reddish, verging on brown. No, it was the color of a gazelle. You can't have seen that color ever. It's the color of a gazelle, a color that can only be that of a gazelle. Nar had flown very high, then he swooped like a stone, holding in its wings. When he was close above the gazelle, he spread out his wings and froze in the air for a moment. Then he slipped sideways, spread out like a sheet of paper until he almost touched the earth. Again he circled round and flew high, while the gazelle stood as though rooted to the ground. I thought that Nar was simply exhibiting his prowess before the wretched animal, as all the strong do. But he made the same show more than 6 times, with extraordinary violence. And then he began again, circled round, and flew back to me. I saw him stretch out his huge wings, alight with haughty languor, on his wooden perch planted in the sand, and close his eyes, while the gazelle came after him on its thin legs as though a hyena were after it. I grasped Jadon by the shoulder and woke him up, for it seemed to me as though he had been asleep. What then? I asked. I went back to my people. At first I thought that Nar did not want to hunt that day. You know, falcons have their particular character. But what happened was more terrible than that. Nar did not leave his perch at all afterwards. He stayed standing with his proud breast and his hooked beak in the shadow of the gazelle, which kept close to him. He did not eat for an entire week, though I tore the leather hood from his eyes. He didn't look at any piece of meat I put in front of him. He didn't even look at the gazelle, which stood motionless beside him, gazing silently at him. Each time I went to try to feed Nar, the gazelle came unexpectedly and hovered round me, like a baby, rubbing its pink nose on the back of my hand, stretching out its muzzle to my neck, rubbing its head on my arm. Then it circled round and came quietly to stand beside the wooden perch. Jadon stood up and walked round the wooden bench, bringing out his rusty box and beginning to roll his tobacco again. I could not distinguish his features in the darkness, but I heard his voice as if from a distant cavern. One day I woke up to find Nar lying beside his wooden perch. His breast was thin and bare, and his eyes were closed. I could not find the gazelle. Most likely it had gone away during the night after Nar had died. I got up from my place and stood in front of him. He had finished rolling his tobacco, and I lit a match, asking, I wonder where the gazelle went. In the pale light of the match I saw his face as it had always been, thin, harsh, cold. His lips moved. It went to die among its people. Gazelles like to die among their people. Falcons don't care where they die. Ghassan Kanafani, Men in the Sun, and Other Palestinian Stories. If you'd like to get a copy of this, there's a link in the description. That's one of the ways that you can support this channel. If you'd like to support this channel for free, hit like, subscribe, share this with other people who might be interested in hearing Palestinian literature read to them. I don't do that for many of my reviews, but in this one I did. If you'd like to thank me for this presentation, consider using Buy Me a Coffee or PayPal. They're linked below. If you want to support me on an ongoing basis, there's links to Patreon and YouTube membership. You'll get early access to reviews like this one, have a chance to chat with me behind the scenes, and get access to videos that I don't release to the general public. If you'd like to sponsor a book in the future, my Amazon wishlist is linked below. You can see all different genres of books there. Obviously, stuff that's on Palestine will be for this channel, but you might see stuff on France for a project I work on with a friend called The Americans in Paris, or my main Stephen Heiner channel, which I invite you to look at either of those projects. But obviously, if you pick one for Palestine, you buy it, send it my way, I will do my best to review it in a timely manner, and that's a way for you to sponsor the video. As we work towards monetization on the channel, of which our goal is to donate 100% of the profits from that monetization to the Palestine Children's Relief Fund. You'll see them linked below. Go check them out. Consider donating and supporting them directly, but you can support them indirectly by watching as many videos as you can on this channel. And as I said, once we do, we'll be able to use our profits to help them in their mission, which is to assist Palestinian children get medical care who could not otherwise get it. Until next time, enjoy your reading.